Hey everyone, welcome. Come on in. I've got Instagram live streaming and I've got YouTube live streaming, and so you can join any place that you want. What I'm going to do here today is I'm going to answer some questions. I have a bunch of questions that have been submitted from all over the place, and so I'm going to look at those different ones. I originally started doing this because I had a Patreon goal of hitting, I think it was 25 patrons, and we hit that a lot sooner than I thought we would. And so the first people who get priority for their questions will be patrons, but there's also this chat feature on the side, and we're going to see if it works. So if you want to ask questions in the chat feature, I'll try and get to those, but I have a lot of different ones. I have a lot of different questions like from different places to get through, so I'll do my best. So feel free to ask questions in the chat box and I'll try and get to it, but I've got lots of others here first. So the first question is from Shay Bynes. She's one of my patrons and someone who I know. She runs her own podcast called The Kingdom Driven Entrepreneurship. She does a bunch of cool stuff, and so you should follow her. But her question was, is raising your salary via contributions rather than from revenue a short-term plan or a long-term plan, and why? And I think that's a good question. So she's referring to, I don't take a salary out of DonorSee, and I've decided to do that for a few reasons, but the way I support myself, among other ways, is I have a Patreon. And so I don't, whenever someone donates some money on DonorSee, 0% of that, none of that goes to me. I don't ever take a salary, or I don't get benefits or anything like that. So 100% of that money goes to like operational costs and actually helping out the people in need and so forth. What I do is I have people who support me separately on Patreon. And so just to make things clearer for everyone, I've delineated those two things. And she asked if it's a short-term plan or a long-term plan. It's actually a long-term plan. I would like to do this for I would like this to be how I support myself, even when DonorSee is like flush with cash and able to support, tens and hundreds of employees. Even at that point, I'd still love to have Patreon be the way that I get supported. And the reason is because we're a for-profit company with a social mission, and I want people to, one of the things that you guys might not see as much is when I'm from my end, from the back end side of things, I have a lot of people who don't know me very well. They don't know me on a personal level. They're out to they're out to get whatever they can get. They want to kind of cause doubt and cast doubt wherever they can. And so my job as the face of DonorSee is to do the best job possible conveying my authenticity and my desire to actually push forth the mission itself. And so in order to do that, I'm not taking a salary, and I thought that would be a good long-term plan, not just short-term. And so, yeah, anyone who supports me on Patreon, to that end, I'm really grateful. Shay's second question was, what plan for DonorSee over the next 6 months has you most excited? So 6 months is a long time. We just got a nice injection of funding, and so DonorSee is gonna have this total transformation over the next 6 months. I think DonorSee today almost looks like a skeleton of what it'll look like in the next several years. But the one plan for DonorSee that has me most excited, I won't go into too much detail about this because this is like a whole separate video. This is a whole separate announcement, but we're going to launch a feature called Donor Reviews, and I'm just going to leave it at that. I don't want to get too far into that because that's just a separate thing. Zach Bentley has asked me, this is a longer question. He says, I'll be honest, I haven't been following the DonorSee investor push very closely, other than that I know it was very successful. I'll also admit I don't know that much about investing, so I wanted to make those two statements first before I ask this question. As an investor, the expectation is that you invest hoping to receive a profit. Yep. So how does this model make sense with DonorSee, which promotes itself as a charity which cuts out the waste? How are investors expecting to make a profit, or are they not expecting to make anything from this? That's a really good question. And that was actually one of the things I was wondering about when I launched this WeFunder. Okay, let me give some background. So for those of you who don't know, DonorSee is a for-profit company, and we recently raised a round of funding on WeFunder. So the way that works is we're selling a portion of the company, and if the company did well and we sell it for a larger amount, the people who invested at this smaller amount will get their money back, and then some on top of that. And so we're not a nonprofit. DonorSee is a for-profit company. And then so Zach is asking, well, how are you guys a for-profit but then also a charity? Like, don't those two things kind of conflict? And then he asked the second question, but let me address this first one first. So the conflicting question. I think the best way to think about whether or not these things conflict is to look at the current charity and nonprofit industry. As it stands right now, there are a lot of nonprofits who, yeah, they don't make a profit, but they also are pretty ineffective, and they're not doing much to help people. They're not doing much to push forth any kind of valuable mission. They're simply surviving, or they're simply donor base. But as far as actually helping people in desperate need, they don't do that as much. That there's a lot of nonprofits out there like that. So the question is using the nonprofit model actually a good idea? And I was someone who I started a nonprofit. I actually still own, or still run, I guess you could call it, a 501c3 nonprofit that I started when I was in Malawi. This was like 3 years ago. And the idea was we would build houses for orphans and widows. And anytime people donated to this, it was tax deductible. And again, it was like we couldn't make a profit out of it because it was structured as a nonprofit. And as someone who ran that for a long time, I came to realize that the nonprofit structure has a lot of incentives in the wrong place. It doesn't incentivize the organization to become sustainable. It doesn't incentivize the organization to be able to run itself. And frankly, it actually doesn't even incentivize the organization to complete its mission. Like, let's say the organization's mission is to help the poor. The nonprofit structure doesn't actually necessarily do a good job of that. And so when I was looking at the landscape of, okay, well, I'm starting this new company, I'm starting DonorSee, what can we do to make DonorSee as effective as possible? Looking at that landscape, we decided to make it an LLC. One, because it's easier to make, and two, because we think that there's better ways to show transparency than through the government, than the current structure of government regulations that are imposed on nonprofits. And if you go to any kind of large nonprofit headquarters, they have sometimes a whole building or a whole department dedicated to accountants and lawyers, just trying to keep everyone regulated. And so the idea with DonorSee is we want to cut out all of that stuff. And in order to do that, we decided to not be a nonprofit and to actually be a for-profit. And we have different mechanisms for making sure that things are transparent and held accountable, and that we stick to our mission of helping the poor. Like we actually care about that mission, so much so that we're willing to forego like the structure of it. And I'm willing to forego a salary because we want to actually help the poor. Okay. And then the second question, how are investors expecting to make a profit? The way it's this isn't like investing in the stock market. So when someone invests on WeFunder, it's not like they can just cash out at any time. It's a high risk, long-term investment. So a lot of people who they invested partially because of the mission and partially because they were hoping for a return at some point. Some people did it more for the return. Some people did it more for the mission. We have a few dozen investors, and so you'd have to ask them which one they chose. So the way that they would get a profit is DonorSee was sold at sold DonorSee stock at a certain valuation, and in 3 to 7 years, if a large organization were to purchase DonorSee, like they were to acquire us, they'd probably acquire us at a much higher valuation than what they bought it at. So if we're acquired in the next 3 to 7 years, or there's some other kind of event like that, the people who invested will get a multiple of what they invested. And so it's an early stage, high risk investment. So what that means is there's a chance that you invest and you don't make any money, something happens and you never see your money again, or because it's early stage and you're getting in more on the ground floor, it could pay off really, really well. And that's the nature of these types of early stage investments. So some people are expecting a profit, and then some people actually told me that they're doing it strictly because they believe in the mission and they want to see DonorSee grow. And whatever your reason is, like my personal goal is to make my investors money and to stick to our mission and to grow fairly sizable. The last part is, are they not expecting to make anything from this? No, I think that they are. Sorry. So then, so the next, and by the way, Zach and Anna Bentley, you guys have been supporting me for a long time, and I just want to acknowledge that and thank you for that. The next question comes from Marley Scarborough, and she asks, she has been supporting me for a long time. How do you decide which projects to fund with monthly gifts? So the projects that are funded, so on DonorSee, we have a mechanism where you can sign up to give monthly. And a lot of people like that because it's really a convenient way to give. Not everyone wants to come to DonorSee.com and sort through projects and read a bunch of stuff and pick the one that they want. Most of our users prefer that option, but there's a lot of people who that's not for them, but they still want to give in a transparent, accountable way. And so for those people, we have the monthly giving option, and the monthly giving option is where people give like, they give like $30 a month, and every month we take that $30 and we distribute it to the most urgent projects. And so the way that we decide what those projects are we have a handful. There's a lot of people who are posting projects on DonorSee, and then we have a handful of them who we not only trust, but we think that they're doing really important work, and they often deal with more urgent projects. And so we distribute the monthly giving to these people that we not only trust, but they're doing like really good work. Like I've talked about Amy Hathaway before. Like if you're signed up for monthly giving, at some point you've probably given to Amy Hathaway, and it's just because she's doing like the most incredible work. I've talked about that in other places, but um, I'll get to the next one. Ooh, all right. Um, let's see. I'm getting some questions about the mic, so I'm just going to adjust that real quick. Next question. We'll do Twitter next. This one comes from. This question comes from Dave Schools. He says, when it comes to personal giving to charity, how much is enough? How does one decide? Uh, so there's not the way that you people have asked this question a whole bunch of different ways. One of the ways that they ask it is they've asked, uh, how can I give? Like, I feel really guilty that there's so much bad stuff happening in the world, and that I live such a fortunate life. How can I give in a way that I don't feel so guilty anymore? And I think kind of like not feeling guilty and also giving enough are kind of like one and the same. Like the reason that you have that guilt, it comes from a very honest place. Um, Usually that guilt isn't un. It, it's usually there for a reason, probably because you're not doing enough of something. And so I think if you do feel guilty about something, it's not you don't necessarily want to ignore that. You might want to look into that more. And so when it comes to how can you give enough, the way that you know that you've given enough is if you have to endure some kind of sacrifice to give. So a lot of people they have um, think of it this way: a lot of people they have a nice salary that they enjoy from their job. They go on vacation days once a year, maybe twice a year, and they have like almost like so much money that they like all their needs are met, most of their wants are met, they're reasonable wants, and then on top of that, they just have some extra money and they give that money. And those people often like don't feel very good at the end of the day. Like they still want they want something more. They want to they still have a residue of guilt at the end of that. Um, the way that you can avoid that is by giving enough where there's some kind of sacrifice. You feel it, right? So if you go on 2 vacations a year and you've been doing that for a long time, and then you're like, you know what? Like, do I really need that second vacation? I like maybe I know this sounds extreme talking to a group of Americans, but you you would maybe give up that second vacation and give that money to the poor instead. So, I mean, when was the last time people talked about giving in terms of that? Think about that. But you really that's Dave. That's the way that I would answer that question. Is you want to give to the point where you feel some kind of sacrifice for it. Um, and that means that's going to be a different thing. So someone who's like a billionaire, like Bill Gates, he is investing. He's giving away 99% of his wealth, and you can be sure that he's making some sacrifices to do that. Warren Buffett is doing the same thing. But then there's a bunch of people in the middle class who that they can't necessarily give away 99%, but they could give away more than they're giving right now. But if you're this is a very personal question. So when you're trying to think to yourself, how can I give enough? Well, give to the point where it hurts, where you feel it some. That's a good question. Okay, this next one comes from Nick Freiling. He says, you've lived in the poorest country in Africa. With that perspective, what's the most blatant example of needless luxury slash expense here in the United States? What's one or two things we can all definitely do without and perhaps then have more to give to the poor? So this goes along with Dave's question. Um, and Nick talks about what's like the one thing. What are the one or two things that you can all definitely do without? I don't think that there is one or two things. I've thought about this a lot, but everyone has probably hundreds of things that they could give up. I think I'm not trying to tell anyone how to live their life. I'm not trying to tell anyone any of that stuff, but I think that you want to give to the point where you want. Um, think of it this way: like let's say you really love peanut butter and you are like, you've started this new job and you eat peanut butter with your sandwiches every day. And then one day you get a bump in your paycheck and you start buying like this super premium peanut butter from the grocery store. Well, that sounds like a silly example, but then you start becoming accustomed to eating this super nice peanut butter and you start thinking, oh, I need this extra stuff. I call this Gleyer's Law, by the way. I made a video about this a while ago, but the idea is that your expenses expand to fit your revenue. So if you're, whatever it is that you're making, you always find new and creative ways to spend your money. And so there's not like one or two things that we can all definitely do without, but like there are people who they feel like they really need like a nice cup of Starbucks coffee every morning. They spend $5 on coffee every morning, and that's kind of a cliche. Like, why can't you just give up your coffee? But it's a cliche for a reason. Like you could just like have a little Mr. Coffee thing and make coffee for 30 cents every morning, and you could get the same amount of caffeine and stuff. But there's a certain amount of luxury associated with going to Starbucks and getting that every day. And so whatever your level in society is, because like I know all these people in Malawi who make a one a 50th of what we make here in the States, and they're still like looking for different ways that they can save money so that they can give to the poor. Like these people who have a 50th of what we have. So the same thing kind of applies to us here in the States when we're looking at someone who's living in poverty or someone who's living in the middle of the road or someone who's upper class. You as soon as you get more money, you come up with more ways to spend it. And sometimes what that means is you invest that money, or you put it into your 401k, or you apply it to your kids' education. Those are all like good things, and it's not bad. And maybe you have some long-term plan to give it all away. Um, but but the generic point is that everyone has like probably hundreds of things that they don't necessarily need. And you know, I'm not telling anyone how to live their life. However you want to give, that's totally between you and your own money and how you want to do things. But yeah, I think that when you're looking at things that you can kind of cut down on, there's so much. It's like, what are you eating? What are your monthly costs? What kind of car did you buy? All of these things, in a lot of cases, people could spend a lot less. And usually I found that you're happier for that. Chris asks, is the first actually last? Okay, so my friend Chris, he's been doing this for a long time. He goes to different people's YouTube channels and he types in the comments section, "The first shall be last." And he's been doing this for a long time, and he actually has kind of like gained some notoriety for this. And so he's doing it here too. But I thought I would include this question anyways, because it's an interesting question. Is the first actually last? It's referring back to this biblical story. There's a verse in the Bible that talks about how the first will be last and the last will be first. And I think that that's interesting. I thought this was an interesting concept I would bring up because right now it seems like Americans are at like the top of the world, and Africans or other people in impoverished parts of the world are maybe at the bottom, at least from a socioeconomic perspective. And we kind of see ourselves up here and them down there in a lot of ways, just in terms of like our wealth and our luxury and our internet connectivity and all these different things. And so in some ways we're like the first and they're like the last. But that Bible verse talks about the first shall be last. Like it's some event that will happen in the future. And I think about this a lot because I've always thought, and I'm just giving my kind of gut instinct about this, but I've always thought that people if there are like rungs of heaven, like if there are people who are higher up in heaven than other people, I think that people who are like from Africa might be higher up than people who are from America, based on how I've interacted with these people. I mean, these people have nothing and they're still trying to live like super faithful lives, and their kids are dying, and none of them have air conditioning, and they just live really hard lives, and they have hard jobs. And if you think your boss is bad, trust me, it's like nothing compared to what a lot of these people endure. And so like in a lot of ways, from a socioeconomic perspective, they're at the bottom. They're at the bottom of the mountain. They're last. But at the end of the day, I kind of wonder what is that going to look like. And I think that, yeah. So Chris, the answer to your question is I think so. Ellen has asked, what kind of skills does it take to work for an organization like DonorSee? Like, what kinds of people does an organization like that need to employ as it grows? Well, so we're looking into a lot of potential hires right now, mostly for contractors, but The types of skills that we're looking for are very tangible skills. So we're looking for people who know Facebook ads really, really well and are able to spend Facebook ads in a way where they're spending less money, where they spend less on Facebook ads than we make on the back end of that. So that's like a very specific type of skill. You need someone who's like super analytical to be able to do that, and you need someone who's able to deliver to be able to do that, right? So I'm not just gonna hire we're not just gonna hire some random social media coordinator who's going to post content for us. No, we're looking for things that are very going to help us scale really well. And so we're looking for people with experience and people who have the skills necessary to scale a company like DonorSee. Because right now we're not small, but it's not like we haven't hockey sticked yet. We're not this huge, massive unicorn. And so the question of how do we get from here to here, that's it takes people with a very specific type of skill to do that. So we're looking with people who are highly competent, highly experienced, and that's the type of thing. All right, so those are let me hop over here. Looks like we've been going for about 20 minutes, so that's good. Jason has asked, I'm interested in your opinion on the effective altruism movement. Actually, before that, I just saw that we have a bunch of questions here. Let me get to these first if I can. Ooh, looks like the volume's not super high. Well, that's unfortunate. Okay. Thanks for letting me know. Okay, so I just want to go through and read those. Sorry, Jason Brunson asked, I'm interested in your opinion on the effective altruism movement. The effective altruism movement is the concept, it was started in part by Will McCaskill. And it's this idea that whenever we're giving money, whenever we're trying to help the poor, we should do it effectively. That's the idea behind it. And I love the idea with one major caveat, and I'll explain it this way. So think of a store like Effective. Imagine if there was a store called Effective Electronics, and their tagline was, "Our electronics basically work." That was their tagline. And imagine the marketplace that would have to exist for a store like that to survive. So the reason Best Buy and Amazon and all these companies are doing really well is because they're all like competing with each other, and they provide like really good electronics to you, and they're high quality, and they work, and they have refund policies and all this stuff. And if a store came along called Effective Electronics, like all that we do is we work, Best Buy and Amazon, they would crush them like a cockroach. They would be nothing, because there's all these stores that do a really good job. The thing about effective altruism that's interesting is the reason that there was that the charity sector had an opening for a movement like effective altruism to gain traction is because the charity sector has not been being effective. Like imagine if effective electronics was this really big movement that lots of people got involved with. The only way that would be a possibility is if there were no other good electronics store out there. There was no one who was doing a good job. So effective altruism, it's a good movement, right? The idea is that you're helping people effectively, but the flip side of that is like, wait, what is the landscape of the charity sector that we have to have a movement called effective altruism? It's pretty, it's kind of insane, to be honest with you. Like it's just shows the utter lack of effectiveness that have existed in the charity sector for the last several decades. And so I like the effective altruism movement. I think it's a good thing, but I also think it's a major embarrassment that it doesn't exist. I believe Steven Pinker, who's a guy I follow a lot of his stuff, very brilliant guy from Harvard, I think. Steven Pinker said the effective altruism movement is like one of the best ideas of the 21st century or something like that. And it's like all it is collecting data and making sure that we're doing good when we help. That's it. That's all it is. It's not anything. That should be the baseline. Anytime someone starts a charity, the baseline should be, are we being effective or not? And if you're not being effective, then it's like, well, your charity shouldn't exist. But we have so many charities out there that aren't being effective that this one guy came along and said we should be effective, and they decided and so anyways, they decided that that was acceptable. And so anyways, the effective altruism movement is like this new baseline. Hopefully from now on, charities will say, are we effective or not? Okay, good. Now let's ask some more interesting questions. Are we being innovative? How are we going to answer the conundrum where sometimes we want to help the poor and sometimes we want to, we also have bills to pay. We have to keep the lights on in our house, in our office buildings, and we have all these regulations to keep. Like there's more complex, interesting questions that should be being asked. But right now, the charity sector is so depraved of effectiveness that someone had to come along and say, guys, can we at least be effective? So Jason, that's a great question. And the answer is, it's kind of sad that it has to exist in the first place. Like what about the like innovative altruism movement? What about the exceptional altruism movement? Like why don't these things exist? Well, they don't exist because there's this embarrassing lack of effectiveness right now. So yeah, well, so that's my rant. I will say that the guys over at Effective Altruism, really smart, sharp guys. They are, they said something that no one else was saying, and I think that that's really good. But it's so basic that we need to move on. And there's other things I think about that, but I'll leave it at that. Let's see. By the way, thank you, Remy, for the $5. That's super nice. And hi to everyone who's saying hi to me. And Carol, thank you for letting me know about the sound. I turned it up. That's too bad that was happening. All right, let's do the next question. Comes from, if anyone in the chat wants to ask questions, I will get to them. So at this point, so feel free to do that. This question comes from, these questions, it's a series, comes from Kenya Russell. So I'm going to read, she asked several. I'm going to read them one at a time, and then I'll answer them as I go. So the first question is, how do you guarantee that our contributions go to the intended recipient? And that is by far the number one question that we get. And we have it right at the top of our FAQ section. I think a lot of the questions that, well, yeah, we have the answer to that right at the top of our FAQ section, but we need to do DonorSee needs to do a better job of communicating how coordinated we are with these people that we're working with. And so you're going to see a lot of things change on our website over the next several months that are going to help new users understand how they can trust their money with us. But the basic answer is, right now, if you go to the staff picks section, these are people that we have vetted and that we have third parties vouching for them, and that often they're part of some larger donor network, right? So there's a girl named Naftali Foster who is part of an organization called Cure International, and all of the finances that are donated through Naftali go through this really large 27-country organization called Cure, and they're making sure that all of the money is getting used as intended. So it's different on a person by person basis, but we have really strong relationships with a handful of people. That said, that is not enough to scale, right? If you go to the staff picks section, you can see we have a handful of people that we trust and we work with on a regular basis. And that works for now for our current size, but we're looking at bringing on a lot more storytellers over the next 1 to 2 years, like a lot more. And so in order to do that well, we need to have automated tools. And so we've got a lot of stuff lined up for that. So if you want to think about how we're going to achieve this, I'm not going to talk about the specifics because you'll see when we build them, and it'll be very cool when we get to that stuff. But the basic concept is think about a company like Amazon. Like Kenya, if at the beginning of when Amazon was getting started, Kenya might as well have asked, when you buy a blender from Amazon, how do you know that you're going to get the blender how do you know that you're going to get a blender that is good and that doesn't break, and you're actually going to get it delivered to your house on time and stuff? And the way that Amazon deals with it is they have customer reviews. And so 4,000 people have bought that same blender, and because they've all bought it and they've all given it 5 stars and they talk about how amazing it is and it does a great job blending, because all of those people exist, there's this social proof that helps people decide if they want to trust a company to get their blenders. So we've got a few things like that, but there's like 16 different ways to solve this problem to make sure that your money is being used effectively. We're doing a lot of them right now, but we're going to be doing even more of them come the next few months. So keep an eye out on that. It's going to be, I'm just like really excited for some of the innovation that we're going to be pioneering in the next few months. The next question is, what percentage does the organization keep? On average, we keep 3.75%. If you go to our about.donorsee.com page, you'll see the breakdown of everything. But 3.75% is the average. Who else do you pay, including bribes? I understand sometimes it's necessary. Bribes are, yeah. So as far as DonorSee as an organization, we don't. We're basically just working with our team and then contractors to build the platform itself. So we're really focused on building the software that's then used by these aid workers overseas. And so the aid workers, that question is going to be different from all of them. And we're going to, in the next few months, you're going to see some things that we do to help aid workers communicate to you, the donor, how good of a job that they're doing. But yeah, in some cases, bribes are necessary, not really with the types of projects that we're doing. But we do small scale personal stuff. So in a lot of cases, that's not really something that we have to deal with. But yeah, I lived in Malawi for 3 years, and there were many cases where we had to make some of those decisions related to bribes and so forth. These things are very complicated. But that's why we work with people who are on the ground in their respective country. Next, do you keep statistics? Yes, we keep quite a bit. We have a lot of data. Most of it's private that we haven't shared yet, because we want to know when we release information like that, it's not always our information. And so we have to be very careful with how we're doing that stuff. But we keep a ton of statistics. Do you follow recipients long-term or track long-term results? Yeah, that's the idea behind DonorSee is we have people, we've only been around for a little over a year. So we've tracked people throughout that length of time, but the intention is to keep keeping track of stuff like that. So I think I mentioned Amy Hathaway earlier. Amy, amazing person. And what she does is she will do sometimes there's a baby who's emaciated. You can see its ribs, and it needs formula milk to survive and not starve. And so people will provide formula milk for this baby. And after 3 or 6 months, the baby looks like a full, healthy baby. And so we watch that, we track that over time. But then even beyond that, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that Amy does, where she has the baby's caretaker set up with a business. And so then the business can provide enough income to continue to provide formula milk and so forth for the kid. So yeah, there's a lot of long-term tracking that's done. And we're going to do even more of that. We're lots of good stuff there. Okay. All right. So I think I'm going to end it there. I want to say, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. If you had mic problems, I sincerely apologize. This is my first time doing this, but maybe I'll do it more in the future. And Remy, thank you for spending $5 just to tell me that. That was really helpful. So yeah, if you guys have any further questions for me, or you just want to know more about DonorSee, I encourage you to check out about.donorsee.com. Most questions will be answered there. And if you have questions about poverty, perspective, charity, hit me up on Instagram or Twitter or my professional Facebook page. I try and interact with people as much as I can on there. So thank you guys so much. I will talk to you again, and this was a blast. So bye.